Hi, this is Matt Shepard.
And I'm Chad Shepard.
Coming up on Shep Shower and Shave, why the NBA Finals is over before it began, how our city has lost a legend, and why his philosophy is still the best way to build a champion. So we witnessed Game 1 of the NBA Finals last night in a rout for Golden State in Oakland, California. And many people, and it's been built up for a long time, Chad, that this is the trilogy. I mean, it's gotten so bad. We almost kowtow to the NBA. It's gotten so bad where social media, whether it be Sports Illustrated, ESPN, wherever, and I get it, it's part of marketing, and I get that ESPN and ABC want to play it up because it's on their air. They should. That's exactly what they should do. It's gotten to the point, though, where they're using it in a sense of Star War-like marketing, where it's going to be this huge development for sports in general. You don't want to miss it. And I'm guessing there were a lot of people tuned out midway through the third quarter with this. I think this series, and I'm not saying this because of Game 1. This is not a knee-jerk reaction, so please don't take it that way. I think this series is over, and I think it's over before it began because Golden State is not just clearly the better offensive team, they're clearly the better defensive team. This has nothing to do with rest. It has nothing to do with rust. It has nothing to do with redemption of a year ago. It has everything to do with who the better team is, and more importantly, why that team is willing to sacrifice on the defensive side of the floor. Cleveland's a really good offensive team. The best player in this series plays for Cleveland. You could make the argument that combined, the three best players play for Cleveland. And I'm talking about that the three-headed monster. If you took the three best players for Golden State, the three best players for Cleveland, my guess is many people would rather have the Cleveland Cavaliers' three best players in Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Kevin Love, not in that particular order. But the depth of Golden State, but more importantly, their willingness to sacrifice on the defensive end, I think is the difference between these two teams. And that's why I figured, and I said this already in a podcast earlier, this series is not going as long as people originally predicted.
Now, whether it's the 5, 6, 7 days off that you talked about before this, leading right into this series for Cleveland or for both teams, really, that shouldn't really be a factor. But Golden State looks a lot fresher, don't they? And it seems like the depth is one thing that you alluded to, but they're scoring at will, carving right through Cleveland's defense when Cleveland even has time to set up. Right. And it's not like there's
no communication by Cleveland.
They play a faster game. Golden State plays a faster game, but not every basket is scored in transition. And Cleveland still, it seems like, is not getting set. And I think listeners will remember a specific play last night where it was about a 3-on-2 break, and Kevin Durant comes right down the gut.
Middle.
And both defenders bust out to the sides to get the shooters in the corners. Kevin Durant just flushes it home. If that display was what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, and this is drawn out into about a 3-week drama if the ABC producers get their wish, if that's what we're expecting in the next couple of games, it is going to be ugly, and it is over now.
Well, think about this. When you're a little kid and you're just learning the game, one of the very first things you learn from any good coach is, in transition, stop ball.
Right.
Okay? And that's, by the way, that's universal in sports. You don't have to be a basketball player to understand that, okay? I don't care if it's hockey. I don't care if it's football. You go and you stop the ball. You mentioned the dunks. Kevin Durant, by himself, had 6 dunks, and most of them, I would say most of them, were uncontested. Here's the thing that should really concern Cleveland fans. And again, I greatly appreciate what they've done this year. It's not easy to do what LeBron James has done. 7 straight NBA Finals. His numbers in the Finals are crazy. That was his 41st NBA Finals playoff game.
Unbelievable. Half a season in the Finals alone.
It's
not
incredible.
The playoffs, the Finals.
It's incredible. But I'm not sure Steph Curry played all that well. Kevin Durant, do you know how many players, if you look at the box score, do you know how many players for that game last night, in Game 1 of the NBA Finals, do you know how many players in a Golden State uniform finished in double figures? Look at the box score and read it carefully. The number is 2. Kevin Durant had 38. Steph Curry had 28. And Curry was a plus 20 to lead everybody in that category if you believe in plus-minus with basketball. It's huge in hockey. People are just starting to come along around to it. Now, I said earlier, Steph Curry maybe not played all that well. He still shot 50% yet. He still went 6 for 11 from deep. He still had 10 dimes. He's still an outstanding player. It shows you the bar that we have, maybe my fault, the bar I have for Steph Curry. He missed some shots that I thought for sure were going in, or shots that he usually makes. That's why people should be scared. They should be scared that Klay Thompson went 3 of 16. They should be scared that Draymond Green went 3 for 12. They should be scared that off that Golden State bench, nobody had more than 3 field goals made. And yet they still blew Cleveland's doors out of the building.
Both scorers that were in double digits for Golden State required more than 20 field goal attempts to do so. Kevin Durant took 26 shots, and Curry took 22. Nobody else on the team had more than 16, and that was Klay Thompson, as you alluded to. So that's the really scary thing, is the efficiency word that people like to put around all those NBA statistical metrics. Golden State is known as that efficient offense. They're not even playing on that level yet, operating at that frequency yet, and still they blow out Cleveland up by 20 for most of the game, most of the second half, and it looked like it could have gone to 30 just as easily as 20, and even did, I think, for some stretches.
All right, let me ask you this. That good for the league? I mean, everybody wanted to see it, right?
I don't see how it can be. How can blowout after blow? You know, if these are the two best teams in the league and it's not a close matchup, it's a declarative statement. It's an emphatic statement that the balance of the league is pretty off kilter.
I thought it was interesting last night during the Open, in which Mike Breen and Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy started to set the stage, that they had alluded to Kevin Durant as a Hall of Famer. And it made me pause for a moment, because I think he's a phenomenal player, don't get me wrong. But we rush guys into the Hall of Fame so quickly. So I asked a couple of people, friends of yours and mine, Greg Kelser, Terry Mills, hey, is this guy a Hall of Famer? They said first ballot, without question. They're going to win this ring, I believe. If he doesn't win a ring, is he looked upon the same way with this team if they fall short? Now, I think they're going to win it, so maybe it's a moot point. But don't you think this reflects poorly on whomever, him, Steph Curry, whatever, if this team, the way it is constructed, doesn't win the championship?
I do think it's fair to say that Kevin Durant has hitched his wagon to the success of this Golden State Warrior franchise in the immediate future. We saw the criticism that he opened himself up to last summer. And when you think back about the way LeBron's decision to go to Miami sparked off so much hatred and dislike of him, and what Kevin Durant's done, the mirror images are a little bit startling at times.
Yeah, what's the difference? One didn't have a TV show, for crying out loud.
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
A lot of that money, I think, went to charity and things like that. But people don't
Boys
like to
and
remember
Girls
that
Club.
kind of stuff.
Well, that's because it wasn't populated as much, and you could have still done that without making it all about you and the scene. But go ahead.
That's fair. But my point about Kevin Durant is he got to watch LeBron act that out. He saw what happened, and he still made the decision to put himself on a wanted poster and basically make himself public enemy number one. He couldn't have thought this was going to go another way, right?
Right.
He couldn't have thought this was going to be happy and roses.
Yeah.
So, you got to accept the ramifications of those choices, the main one of which is now that your star is tied to how far the Golden State Warriors are able to go in the immediate future.
It's a really good point. They're so deep. They're so good. LeBron James last night went 9 for 20. I thought his free throw shooting is what surprised me as much as anything else, 8 for 12. He did finish with a double-double. He was 2 assists shy of a triple-double. But he also was a game worst, minus 22. In other words, when he was on the floor, his team was outscored by 22 points during that stretch. He logged 40 hard-earned minutes, finished with 28 points, one of 3 Cavs in double figures, 2 of Cleveland players with a double-double. Kevin Love had 15 points and 21 rebounds. Was that a good game from LeBron James? Or do you think we have, going back to the previous statement about Steph Curry, raised his bar so high that when you put those numbers on paper and you look at them, originally you would think that looks really good. But then you associate the name LeBron James with it, and because he's so good, we think it's almost disappointing.
I do think that there's an unfair level of criticism and that he's under,
Yeah.
and that he receives because of how successful he's been. We talked about the statistics earlier. He's played in 41 final games now, averaging over 27 points, I think 9.9 rebounds, and around 8 assists, if I remember correctly. So he's nearly averaging a triple-double in his career in the finals.
Yeah.
That is incredible. And we look at what he did yesterday, and, yeah, it does look pretty pedestrian. To me, the 8 turnovers is probably the most concerning number. Now, I understand that he handles the ball a lot more than a player in his position would be.
Yeah, but he got caught up in the air a number of times where he didn't know what he was going to do with it. It looked like a young player, a player in the finals for the first time against a team he was unfamiliar with.
Right. And my point about him, the frequency with which he handles the ball, is that obviously there's a lot more opportunities for that turnover. But he was getting stripped from behind.
I know.
And it was not the typical type of plays where it's a straight-up one-on-one on the outside of the key and somebody has quicker hands and makes a steal. So his 8 turnovers was concerning, but he had 8 dimes. Nobody else on the Cavs had more than 2. Kyrie Irving had 4 turnovers himself.
All right, let me play devil's advocate real quick. Steph Curry handles the ball a lot for Golden State, doesn't he?
Yeah,
okay,
but
he had 2 turnovers. I mean, Golden State as a team only had 4. Curry had 2. Draymond Green had 2. Cleveland had 20 turnovers.
Yeah.
I don't care who you're playing. I don't care how good your team is. And I don't care how high of a superstar status your best player has. You're not winning any NBA Finals game if you're turning it over 20 times,
They could have run that game through Kyrie Irving at the point guard position, which they'll probably have to do to win at least one, have him go off for a game, and it still wouldn't matter. As long as that's the bottom line total for your team, whoever's at fault as a primary ball handler has got to turn things around.
Now, look, that's one thing in the NBA and the news, and we'll see what happens in Game 2 and Sunday. Closer to home, the bigger news, I think, was that Jack McCloskey has passed. McCloskey was the architect of the Bad Boys. He was the general manager for the Detroit Pistons from 1979 through 1992. I think the way he constructed this team is the way you want to construct a team, and what he meant to this city, and perhaps doesn't get nearly enough credit just because Chuck Daly was the head coach. Daddy Rich had a TV show, dressed to the nines, had the perfect hair, and took over the original dream team for Team USA. But Jack McCloskey was the heart and soul of that franchise at that time from somebody other than Isaiah Thomas, other than a player. His willingness to draft Isaiah Thomas, when Isaiah Thomas basically said, I don't want to play for you. I don't want to come there. But McCloskey basically said to him, I don't care. You're my draft pick. I'm building my franchise around you. To have that foresight and that stick-to-itiveness and that strength, he didn't do what the San Diego Chargers did with Eli Manning. He did not cave. He said, I'm going to show you that this is better than you originally thought. To draft a guy like Joe Dumars out of McNeese State, I mean, in today's, with the amount of publicity that the NBA drafts gets today, and I suppose it's had it to a certain extent. How many people are going to support, embrace somebody who gets drafted out of McNeese State? Not many, and I mean that. There's a lot of people like, are you kidding me? Why would you want that?
And the personality to boot. Joe Dumars was a soft-spoken guy, right? He doesn't come in and command the attention like some small school players are capable of doing. That's what's really interesting about it to me.
Right. That, and then you look at the willingness to go get Bill Laimbeer in a trade. Who was Bill Laimbeer, right? I mean, that's what everybody was talking about. Nobody knew who that guy was. To go get Rick Mahorn, to pull the trigger on a deal from Mark Aguirre, to draft Dennis Rodman in the second round out of, again, Southeast Oklahoma State. What? Remember, when Joe Dumars was originally drafted in 1985 by the Pistons, there were still some local guys, specifically Sam Vincent, still on that draft board. That's who a lot of people in Detroit would have loved to have had. Oh, come on, let's go get a local guy. Let's get a guy we're used to seeing, we've watched for a long time. Let's go get a guy like that and see what he can do for us.
And you can view that as an easy win if you're that person a lot of times. You buy yourself a little bit of luxury time where people are not going to be as hard on you because you've taken that local pick or you've tried to appease the masses in that way.
Let me tell you who was drafted ahead of Joe Dumars. Uwe Blab Indiana, was one pick ahead of him. Dallas could have had Joe Dumars. They took Uwe Blab. Dallas could have taken Joe Dumars again because they had the 16th and the 17th pick. They took Bill Wennington. Denver could have had him at the 15th spot. They took Blair Rasmussen. The San Antonio Spurs, who do nothing wrong, could have had him at pick 14. They took Alfredrick Hughes. I mean, Karl Malone, people forget, was in that draft. He was drafted 13th. Guys like Keith Lee and Ed Pinkney and Detlef Schrempf and John Koncak and Xavier McDaniel and Benoit Benjamin were all taken ahead of the second all-time leading scorer. But I think what Jack McCloskey did for Detroit more than anything else is bring basketball to a little bit of a consciousness. I wouldn't call this town a basketball town, would you? I wouldn't. I think back before you were born, when I was really young, it was an unbelievable high school basketball mecca. It really was. But the Pistons, before Jack McCloskey got on board, the Pistons really weren't a title contender, nor were they a playoff contender. Way back when they first moved here from Fort Wayne, they were under 500, but they were in the playoffs once in a while. They never really made much of a threat, much of a push at all until McCloskey got here, took them to 9 playoffs, took them to 5 straight Eastern Conference playoffs, took them to 3 NBA title series in a row, and then back-to-back championships. I think what he did more than anything else is he brought a pride here to Detroit about that team and how that team was symbolic of this city. But maybe as more important than anything else is his willingness to support his guys. He didn't go and apologize for anything they did, their toughness, their roughness, some things that people did not like when Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer and those guys walked off the floor against Michael Jordan. You know who was waiting for them in the tunnel? Jack McCloskey. What did he do? He didn't tell them to turn around and go back out. He gave them a massive hug. He was what this city resembled, embodied, and wanted to be the entire time he was in that front office. And he had to make some tough decisions, too. Trading Adrian Dantley, allowing Rick Mahorn, exposing him to the expansion draft for the Minnesota Timberwolves. But this is a guy, I think, you built, or the way he built the Pistons at the time, and continued to tweak them and make them fun to watch, but still keep their DNA, still keep their identity. I think that's the way you're supposed to build teams, not just basketball teams, but teams in general.
So to you, that's a little bit of the legacy of Jack McCloskey. He allowed the identity of the Pistons to really shine through in their players. It wasn't some manufactured brand,
Correct.
Which is my least favorite word in the English language. It gets tossed around so much.
What, brand?
Today. Brand.
Yeah.
Every person's got a brand. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Can't believe we have room for 360 million brands in this country. And that's what speaks to me is that the players were genuine in their representation of the city and their representation of the organization in an era where empowering players is still the norm. Players are getting more and more power, more and more leverage. I mean, literally, inmates running the asylum, you'll have players owning teams soon. With Derek Jeter, I think LeBron has expressed a desire to do that. This is kind
that's a goal.
To me, this is kind of all I'm saying is this is the golden era. This is where there's a little bit of nostalgia there.
Yeah.
And he was a different breed in that regard. He was trusting his talent. He trusts his ability to evaluate and the people that his scouts, their ability to evaluate.
Yep.
And some of the players that you mentioned, not popular picks, not easy picks to make.
Not known picks.
But having a philosophy and following through and executing on that philosophy and seeing one guy as a small cog in the bigger machine and having the conviction to say, yes, that's the cog we need right now. He's going to put us over the top, and then following through with that. And to me, the thing about it is willing to put your name on the line with those picks, with those players, with those hirings, and then allowing your legacy to take after that. Because so many people are trying to play the separation game. You see it constantly in the NFL, where it used to be unspoken that you'd get 2-3 years as a head coach to try and implement your system. And then Rob Chudzinski got about 8 months with the Cleveland Browns. Since then, in my mind,
new general manager, new ownership.
Right, and I understand all the factors behind that. But the bigger game plays into that. It's about ownership, of decisions. And when you don't have a GM and a coach and an owner that are all together and willing to put their feet to the fire collectively on a set of decisions, it becomes that guy's decision.
It's a
and
good
when it
point.
doesn't work out, you cut that guy off. And it sounds like Jack McCloskey, he owned his decisions.
Yeah, I've got a boss who constantly tells me this, and I think it's awesome. He's constantly reminding us that he says you got to own your own shit, and that's true. That's exactly how Jack McCloskey was. But he and Chuck Daly had that good, sound, strong working relationship. You know, people forget Chuck Daly was not a well-known coach before he took over the Detroit Pistons. Don't lose sight of that, okay? When people think about Chuck Daly, they think about him as a two-time champion with the Pistons, as the main guy for the Dream Team, of course. But they forget that he was also a coach in Cleveland, Philadelphia, as an assistant. But he coached in Cleveland before he came to Detroit. And he was 9-32. He only coached 41 games for the Cavaliers. It's not like that was a slam dunk. You're not going out and getting Pat Riley. You're not going and getting Phil Jackson. He didn't come to Detroit with multiple rings. Jack McCloskey took a chance. It was a risk, and I'm sure general managers do that on a regular basis that we don't even know about, and we don't always recognize them. But the beauty of what Jack McCloskey was, I think most people know at the time that he was the general manager, most people knew who Jack McCloskey was. Today in the NBA, general managers, you know Phil Jackson, right? There are certain guys you know who are the general managers or presidents of their teams. You know who the decision makers are. There's a few guys like that, Pat Riley, Phil Jackson, because of what they've done on the bench as much as anything else. But not many people know general managers in sports. For some reason, we seem to gravitate more toward baseball because a lot of times it's 162 games and we're seeing them up in that presidential box, if you will. But in the NBA, you don't know many general managers unless they were former players.
Right.
Jack McCloskey, even though he wasn't that former player, everybody knew.
And we talked a little bit about managing egos. To me, if I'm in that position, if I'm, say, the GM of a football team and I draft that franchise quarterback, I would have such a hard time not being in that guy's ear constantly saying, listen, man, if you don't do this, we're going down together. Okay, if you can't get your feet off the ground and can't get this blimp in the air, it's you and me both. Okay, and you're the one who's got the multi-million-dollar signing bonus.
Right.
To be able to have a cool collective persona about that whole thing, understanding all the pressure points that are coming in at you at all times, and being able to still be a friend to the players in that situation, that's something you can really respect because his mentality.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd
place.
use the word friend to the players, but I mean the mutual respect, which is vital.
At
right?
least being a point of reference for the fans to understand that this guy is somebody who treats players well here, and he becomes a little bit of a beacon, much like Ken Holland was or has been for the Red Wings, where it makes it an attractive free agency spot. It's an attractive place for when your draft picks get. You know, if I'm a fan of the Sacramento Kings or a team like that, I feel bad because if we make a good draft pick, it's proven, it seems, that the environment is borderline toxic and that it spoils bad players. It's nice when you can take pride in your front office as a fan and say, I like that this guy is the one who's rolling out the red carpet and creating the welcome party for our next draft pick.
It's interesting you bring up Ken Holland. How is Ken Holland revered compared to a guy like Jack McCloskey? See, there are certain general managers in this town, like Dave Dombrowski. Let's use him as an example. What he did here in Detroit was pretty impressive. For him to lure a guy like Pudge Rodriguez, for him to get a guy like Jim Leland on board, to take that team to a World Series, to make them World Series competitive on a regular basis, but they never got over the top, leaves a bad taste in many people's mouths. They don't feel like he did a good enough job in replenishing or building the farm system, but they do like certain moves that obviously were made, Miguel Cabrera, obviously, some of the draft picks and so on and so forth. Stan Van Gundy will leave out for now. Joe Dumars is widely viewed as a guy who left here disappointed because I still say one of the worst things that he ever did was the trade Chauncey Billups for Allen Iverson, and that kind of stained his career. We shouldn't forget that his team was playing in the Eastern Conference Finals on a regular basis while he was here and did win a championship, and it was a championship that many people still kind of disrespect. I saw a poll the other day that they ranked the top NBA champions from 2000 until 2016, and that Piston team of 04 was the 16 seed because they didn't have the superstars, that they didn't win their division. And it's funny how we kind of turn arguments around. We act like the regular season isn't all that important. Wake me up when the postseason begins, right? Then when a player doesn't play during the regular season, all hell breaks loose and everybody says, come on, how can you not be playing? You're a multimillionaire. You get paid to play a game that I would love to play, so on and so forth, right? And then you look at the general manager with the Detroit Lions, Bob Quinn, no grade yet because it's only in his second year. Martin Mayhew, people felt severely disappointed in his efforts because of some of the draft picks that he made, so on and so forth, and some of the ones that he missed out on. But we know those guys because they're in our town. With a guy like Jack McCloskey, a guy like Ken Holland, people know who Ken Holland is. Where does he fall on our discussion of admiration like I had with Jack McCloskey? And I'm not saying when Ken Holland dies. I'm saying eventually when Ken Holland is gone, how will we remember him? Fondly or the last few years just hanging on?
Well, I hope that the book is not closed completely on Ken Holland, and I think, unfortunately, most fans around this area are probably going to side with what your final statement was there, and that he's just kind of hanging on right now. Yeah. I think, to me, Ken Holland is a little bit like Matt Stafford, and even a little bit like Dave Dombrowski, I would say, or Jim Leland, people like that, and in that I think people in Detroit underappreciate some of our very own and some of our best, and because they don't come with titles and banners as frequently or at all, we fail to appreciate their greatness. We've talked about this in a couple other ways before, but to me, Ken Holland, a good measure to me is looking at how someone's contemporaries view them, how their peers view them, how they're viewed across the national landscape or even international landscape of their sport and their league.
Only his sport? Just hockey is what you're saying.
I don't care how Dave Dombrowski thinks about Ken Holland or vice versa, but I can tell you how many people in baseball respect Dave Dombrowski, how many people kind of crap their pants on the inside when he went off to Boston because they knew that he was going to begin engineering another set of champions there. I can tell you what people think about Ken Holland across this league, why he's continually chosen to lead Hockey Canada among the best minds in the world, period. Yeah. Why he continually helps build that program. He's had a hand in junior hockey Canada in the past. He's helped.
He gets a bad rap because he's associated with Scotty Bowman, and people felt here in Detroit, people feel like Scotty Bowman's the one who built those Red Wings Stanley Cup champions. And since Ken Holland
is that he hasn't been successful in the Cup era or as successful, or in the
Cap era. Even though he does have a Cup in the Cap era in 2008,
and he's one of the people that helped engineer us out of the lockout situations in the first place.
Right.
When he helped with the competition committee, he helped create the adjustments with overtime and some of the rule changes and things like that. He is one of the forefront minds in the game.
I also think it's the what have you done for me lately type argument. Since 97, since he took over, 4 President's Trophies, 10 Central Division titles, 3 Stanley Cups. That's pretty damn impressive. 5 Western Conference titles. And they qualified for the playoffs in every year but this past season. So he's a guy who has built teams that challenge, okay? But I do believe guys like Jack McCloskey are viewed almost in a greater light because people feel like he took it from scratch with nothing to show for it and had to build it, quote-unquote, the right way.
So if you burn brighter for a shorter period of time, is that going to more endear you to the fans than if you have sustained success over a longer period in a league that you can argue is more difficult to have sustained success in? So you rattled off some of the accomplishments of the Red Wings under Ken Holland, and I understand the frustrations of Red Wings fans because all that comes almost in the prior 10 years of this 20-year block. In the last 10 years, that success has not been the same, and really since the 2009 Cup final and the retirement of Nick Lidstrom in the seasons following, the team has not been at the same level of competitiveness.
Yeah.
I understand that. I empathize with that. And this why it gets into the bigger conversation of philosophically, are the Red Wings built the wrong way? We talk about the Tigers and how they're built. They are a station-to-station team.
Yeah.
They're not going to go first to third frequently enough. They're not going to
They did have a double steal the other night. You know that,
was nice.
Right?
I saw you tweet that. They only had, 14 steals on the year, and they had a double steal a couple nights ago. But you look at the way that the teams at the top of the AL are built, and we've talked in the past about how the Tigers are not necessarily built to compete with those teams.
I'm just saying, don't you think you have to win different ways? I mean, because you're going to eventually run into really good pitching. You're going to eventually run into really good hitting at some point. You have to be able to find a way, and I'm not talking about just basketball or baseball, I should say, but you got to be able to find a way to win differently. I mean, that's why, going all the way back to our original discussion regarding Golden State and Cleveland, that's what should scare people about Golden State. They can win a lot of different ways, Chad. If they're not shooting the ball well, they can still win because they're one of the better defensive teams. If they're not getting a huge production from Steph Curry, they can still go to other guys and get that type of production. I'll never forget one of the first interviews I had with Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, when he first took over the job. And I asked him about why he went there. Is it because of the offense? And he said no. He said, quite honestly, the reason I went there, I came here to be the head coach, is because of its defense. I think I can make them better offensively. What endeared me to the position in the first place is how good they are defensively. They're connected defensively. They have two of the best defenders in the NBA on the same team. That's like Detroit. That's like the Pistons of old. With Dennis Rodman and Joe Dumars, two of the best defenders of the league during that era, Golden State has the same in Klay Thompson and Draymond Green.
So if you buy that premise and that you can apply that to across multiple sports, right? Pittsburgh can beat you in a 3-1 game with an empty netter like they did in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals, or they can outscore you. They'll score 4 on you in 10 minutes like they did in Game 2. They can win in multiple ways. Cleveland or Golden State can win in multiple ways. In the NFL,
I don't think Cleveland can. I don't think Cleveland can win with their defense. I really don't.
Oh, that's fair. I don't know how many teams in the NBA in general can win with their defense.
That's fair.
It doesn't take away the gravity of your
That's a good point.
So to me, maybe that's a characteristic about Detroit teams in general right now, right? Mm-hmm. The Lions, how much can the Lions vary in their ways of winning? I think they can only beat you certain ways. The Tigers.
Well, wait a minute. What's the way? Through the air is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
With a high volume of passes, and they got to control the ball like they tried to do a lot last year. I think they got to keep it out of your hands because they can't score with.
Yeah, but not very many teams can do what Peyton Manning used to do with Indianapolis and have the ball 15 minutes for a game and still beat the Miami Dolphins. What I'm asking you, though, I think we should table it on the Lions right now, just because we don't know with Rick Wagner and T.J. Lang on the right side of that offensive line, and a healthy Travis Swanson, and then the second year with Decker and Glasgow on the left side. I really like the offensive line. They might be able to grind it out on you because of those 5 guys.
Regardless of what they can do with the ball in their hands on offense, they're still not going to shut you down completely on the defensive side of the ball.
That's
true. I think, what we were talking about a little bit, in that the more ways you can win, the better. If, hey, the offense didn't come to play today, or it's 10 degrees below and freezing, and we can't throw or run or hang on to anything.
Yeah.
I don't know that they can win under any circumstances. The Red Wings, we know, are not a team that can win under any circumstances. They can't score enough to beat you in a 5-4 game.
True.
The Pistons need to have their pick and roll operating the right way. God knows you don't need to have them playing defense, or they're not going to win the game.
Right.
And the Tigers are a station-to-station running team. They're going to have to outscore you with a little bit of the power hitting and some of that power pitching.
Well, let's face it, with the Tigers, you're dead on there, and we'll get more into this next week. But with the Tigers, let's face it, they've got 25 wins. 24 of them have come when they've hit a home run. They've only won 1 game this year when they haven't hit a homer. That is scary.
I believe they're the only team in the AL yet to shut a team out this year. And I could be wrong about that. That might have been a statistic from a week ago.
Well, I know they've been shut out 5 times.
We know they've been shut out on the other end. But the point is, defensively, they're not going to throw a lot of one-hitters or a lot of games that have defensive web gem after defensive web gem.
Well, that's true.
And their late-inning substitutions are Dixon Machado and Andrew Romine in the field.
Romine's been a starter lately, for crying out loud.
No, you're right.
You brought up hockey. You brought up the Penguins and the fact that they can outscore. Look, they had 2 goals in a 19-second frame the other day against Nashville. I wondered if that series is over. I would guess that some people are wondering if the Stanley Cup Finals is over as you get ready for Game 3 Saturday night.
I like PK Subban's guarantee that Nashville's going to win Game 3. I think that'll.
How can a hockey player guarantee? Look, I know Mark Messier did it.
There's a lot of facets to it. I think a big part of it is taking a little bit of the heat off Pekka Rinne, because he got pulled in that last game, Game 2.
Yeah.
I think he gave up 4 goals.
Can a
on 20
defenseman
shots
do
or something
that?
like that?
Can a defenseman do that though? Can a
Who else
defenseman
is
make
doing
the
that in
guarantee?
Nashville? Kelly Yarncroc isn't going to make a guarantee.
Well, no,
that steals the spotlight away. PK Subban is the face of that team. He knows that. There's no Ryan Johansson. Philip Forsberg's not going to come out and make
Mike
a big
Fisher's
statement
not
in
a
front of the
scorer.
media.
Yeah.
So unless Carrie Underwood wants to speak for the team, PK Subban is the next most recognizable face.
I think more people would listen if it were Carrie Underwood. I think Nashville has won 4 of the 6 periods so far. What do you think?
I think that's pretty fair. Peter Laviolette says he likes the way they played, except for about a 10-minute burst, and unfortunately, that 10-minute burst led to 3 Pittsburgh goals and icing on the cake in Game 2. I think they'll be fine. I think Pekka Rinne will come back. But what's interesting is in 8 career games against Pittsburgh, Pekka Rinne's yet to beat the Penguins. He's got an .880 save percentage career against them, and he has one win, but it came in relief during a regular season game in the past. So he's not yet beat Pittsburgh. Now, going back to Nashville, I think, is a bit of an underrated factor. It was loud at Pittsburgh. It's going to be really
I don't think it
loud
matters.
in Nashville.
I don't think in hockey it matters.
I think it matters to the home
You
team.
don't think it was loud in Game 7
here-
in Washington when Pittsburgh went in there and beat them?
Those teams have played 7-game series repeatedly at that stage of the playoff.
Okay.
Nashville's not been to the Stanley Cup final, okay? And they've not hosted a Stanley Cup final game. I'm not talking about Pittsburgh. I think it's worse for Nashville for the first couple minutes coming out of Game 3 if they're unable to channel that energy. They have to come out and use that energy the right way and be enveloped in their crowd and not let the nerves get to them early. Because if you have 10 minutes to start Game 3, like you had in the middle of Game 2, you're going to end the series right there. It'll be 3-0 Pittsburgh, and then it doesn't matter.
I think I would be hard-pressed to believe that Nashville will be any louder than the way it was in Toronto or Edmonton in the playoffs earlier this year. That was, and I wasn't there, but just getting a sense through TV and on social media of writers who I follow on social media and were there, it sounded bigger and louder than any rock concert you can ever imagine.
Right. I don't think Pittsburgh is going to be shaken by that.
No.
They're the ones who have done
I
it
think
year
they-
after
I
year.
think
I'm
they
saying
welcome it.
Nashville has to channel that energy and use it in a positive way to get the outcome that they want.